Okay, so here we go with the second half of this video on the Common Core standards and their link to the Massachusetts framework. So as we said in the previous slide, the Common Core standards created a more rigorous and had a wider reach in terms of their both the content and the way they address different subject areas. But there's a special emphasis on math and reading, or ELA, English Language Arts. So those shifts were more dramatic and also more substantial. So for the ELA Common Core standards, there was this idea, and you remember this from the video, that this idea of a staircase of complexity, and that each of the standards builds upon each other. So what you learn in kindergarten, perhaps about identifying a character in the story, then becomes, by the time you're in high school, complex discussion about characters and how they relate to themes and what their motivations are and all of that. And so because you can identify who is a character in a story when you're in kindergarten and what that word means, what a character is, and by second grade you can talk about plot, by fifth grade you can talk about theme, by high school you can really analyze that literature. So that idea is that that you are building upon the knowledge you've gotten in the previous grades. And that becomes really important to the Common Core when we think about things like children moving and relocating from state to state. So you can see why there was a real push for this to start to come into being. And then a second shift is that there is, rather than focus on mainly literary texts, which was the previous standards really focused on the literary works, like fiction works is what we're talking about here, there was a much greater emphasis on informational texts. And you'll see that, like numerically, children are expected to understand and know how to use informational texts. There is an integration of social science, like social studies, and science content knowledge within ELA, so you don't just study those subjects separately. The idea is that you would also study those in your reading class, and I'm putting that in quotes, because you would be reading that nonfiction text that would support the content and the standards that are separate from the Common Core for social sciences and science. And we'll talk about those in this class, that there are separate standards for social studies and science, and those are unique to each state, though there is overlap. They tend to be unique to each state. So the idea in ELA beyond reading is that there are three types of writing, and that all three types of writing are taught during the course of a K-12 education, and that writing is informative explanatory, where you tell about something, narrative, where you learn to write a story, and opinion persuasive, where you learn to give an opinion, persuade someone else in your thinking. There is an emphasis on academic vocabulary, and we're going to talk about this later in the course when we talk about teaching English learners, that academic vocabulary becomes extremely important, especially when we talk about children whose English is not their first language, but it's actually also a social justice issue, and we'll talk about the data on that, which is quite fascinating, on children's exposure to academic language and what that means for their careers, their K-12 careers. So in terms of literacy and literature and informational passages by grade, in grade 4, it's a 50-50 split, right? So up to grade 4, you get half literature, like stories, fiction, and half informational text. And you can see as you go forward under the Common Core, that number shifts quite dramatically, so that by the time you are in 12th grade, most of what you are reading is for information rather than reading a narrative or reading fiction text, whether it's a short story or a play or a novel. So that information text becomes super important. But that also reflects the fact that you're taking a broader group of classes. So your English class is only one of the many classes you take. You may be taking classes in the sciences, you might be taking classes about computers, you might be taking classes, a variety of social studies classes from history to sociology to psychology when you're in high school. And in math, the idea is that math is broken down into domains, and you can see how these domains build upon each other, and it is only geometry that carries through from pre-K, and only in Massachusetts, all the way through to 8th grade. And then the standards are different, and they are specific according to the specific subject area. So if you're looking at algebra, geometry, trigonometry, statistics, probability, all of that in high school, and that is a different set of standards away from these domains that are the pre-K to 8 domains, which are really of interest to us as elementary teachers. And I will tell you that when you are taking your MTELs, the idea is that as an elementary teacher, you are familiar with the standards, with the content that is taught from pre-K through 8. So even if you think, like, my licensure is from grades 1 to 6, I really want to be a 3rd grade teacher, you need to be able to modify your lessons to support those students who need help in the early grade content areas, both in reading and in math, and those students who need enrichment because they're ready to address standards all the way up to 8th grade. So it's a challenging thing, but also I think kind of the exciting and creative part of being a teacher. Okay, so there are assessments, and these really drive our education system, whether we like it or not. And I'm not a huge fan. I think that we do spend too much time on standardized assessment. There is some change around that, and I think that this is somewhere where COVID may change how we approach testing, but it's a big money enterprise, and we as teachers are obligated through our contracts to teach and to administer these tests. 2020, that spring, was the first year we have not had standardized testing. It will be interesting to see if standardized testing will be done in Massachusetts in spring of 21. I don't know, because schools are still not in session and are slowly coming into session. So there are 2 specific groups that there's the SBAC test, the Smarter Balance, and the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Career. And that's the PARCC test. Both of these tests are made by major publishers, and they are made by the College Board, or the Educational Testing Center, which is SBAC, and the PARCC system, which is done by Pearson. Massachusetts is linked to PARCC. That MCAS is linked to PARCC, but ours is separate. It's a particular Massachusetts test, and all of the decision making around those tests is done by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Education, of Elementary and Secondary Education. DESE is the site, and you know that from our syllabus when you, I believe I've referenced DESE in the syllabus. So I'm interested in your experience as a consumer of the Common Core state standards. I'm going to ask you to go to Padlet. This is the Padlet. This is the link. It will take you there. And I'm going to ask you to actually use that Padlet to answer a few questions about this this particular PowerPoint and the other PowerPoint that I've done on the Massachusetts framework, to talk about the Massachusetts framework a little bit. And both of those are on the same Padlet. I'd like you to look at them, and I'd like you, for your homework, to make your comments, and then to respond to or comment on at least 3 of your colleagues' comments about this experience. So I'm looking forward to hear what you think about all of this. And remember, You may feel that you are the learner here, but really you have come through the education system. Some of you even have children in the education system, and all of you know people who are in the education system in Massachusetts. So I'm interested to hear what you think about standards. Do you think they really are important for learning? What about these 4 C's? How do we address those in our classrooms? Because they are important, and we are obligated to do so. And then also I want you to think about standardized testing and what that means, and how that what that experience has been for you. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and we'll talk again soon.